be 100 years since the vision of Fatima. For those of you who don't know about this vision, look on the internet. I've been to the place, I've been to Fatima, because I don't know why. I've always been curious to go and look at these things so that I can know what they're talking about. I've been to Fatima, where the cathedral was built up based on the vision of 3 children. Now, next year is 100 years. Next year is a huge jubilee year for the Catholic Church, and they are planning all sorts of things. Now, I don't know the details. We are good at things after the effect, but we know that many things are going to happen next year in the churches. And one Catholic writer said, I don't think Protestantism will exist after 2017. They are very bold. They are very bold. They have a lot of things to show off about, because we have gone back, many of us, even some of us in our churches, even some of our leaders have gone back to Rome to show their allegiance to Rome. She has cast down many wounded, and all who are slain by her were strong men. How interesting is that? All who were slain by her were not weak men, they were strong men. Because her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. So if we go her way, where are we going? Her way is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. I want to share a testimony with you. Something very serious. And many of you here don't really know me very well. But it's a very awkward thing to say this. But I was demon-possessed. And it's a long story why. But I was taken to a place where they did something to me. I don't know what they did to me. All I know is that they did something to me. And after that, I had something in my head, like a lump growing in my head. It felt like a little marble to start with. Then it became like a little tennis ball, a little ping pong ball. Then it just kept on growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And I didn't know what was going on. Why was I having this headache? And I had such a terrible headache. All I could do was inflict pain on myself by digging my fingernails into my temple to get rid of the pain. And I don't know again why, but one day I spoke to this thing in my head. And I said, if you want me to speak to you, come out of my head. So immediately my pain was gone. And in my thoughts, I was thinking I could go to a medium to get help, to speak to someone and to speak to this spirit that wanted me to communicate with it. Anyway, I'm going to cut my long story short. It's a 3-hour story, which I will try to tell you in the next 10 minutes. And I didn't go to a medium, but this was the time when I was living a worldly life. So I went to a nightclub, and I came home in the morning about 4 o'clock. I never drank much, maybe one drink in the evening for the whole night, because I was always driving. And I always drove myself somewhere, and I drove myself back every time. And I got to the house where I was staying, and I sat down in the kitchen, and I was just having a cup of tea. And I used to smoke cigarettes at the time. I was smoking a cigarette and having a cup of tea and doing the crossword. I was living in London. And I sat in this kitchen. It was a good-sized room, maybe about the size of from where the chairs are to that space there. And I was sitting there, and I heard someone in the kitchen just breathing heavily, like this. And I knew I heard it, but I told myself, I spoke aloud, and I said, don't be silly, you need to go to bed. I think you should, you're hearing things. And finally, after I said that a couple of times, I heard footsteps coming across the floor to where I was. And I was sitting down at the time. And as these footsteps arrived where I was, this satanic being, just materialized in front of me and put his hands over my head like this to literally take over my body. And for the first time in 9 years, I called on the name of Jesus Christ in a positive way. And I shouted, Jesus Christ, help me, like this. And as I said that, the demon just disappeared from me, but I became paralyzed. And I couldn't move for more than 1 hour. I was sitting there. My whole body was soaking wet because of all the energy that came out of me, of what I saw. Finally, after about an hour, I rolled onto the floor, and I went upstairs on my hands and knees because I couldn't walk. I went upstairs. The shock probably should have killed me, really. And I went upstairs to the bedroom and I started to pray. And as I started to pray, the first time in 9 years I was saying the Lord's Prayer, because I didn't know how to pray. I had given up on God. I had turned my back on God like Manasseh. And as I started to pray, I just kept on saying the Lord's Prayer over and over again, because as a child I learnt it. And finally, as I was praying, I could see this bright light surrounding my body, really, really bright light surrounding me. And the demon appeared behind me, and he was trying to touch me. And he kept on moving his hands backwards and forwards trying to touch me, but he couldn't get through the light. And I knew that if I kept on saying the Lord's Prayer, he couldn't get through. So that's part of the story. For weeks and weeks after that, they followed me everywhere I went. And sometimes, and it was different ones, because I knew, I could tell, you could see, I didn't see them face to face anymore like the one that materialized. What I did see was an outline, like an outline of a person following me around. But it was interesting because you could see like you're looking at a glass of water. You can see the water in the glass, but you can still see through it. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And it was like that. And they followed me everywhere. And they used to pull my hair, and they used to tap me on the shoulder or tap me on the leg if I was driving, just to annoy me. And then they would laugh. They did a lot of laughing. They never stopped laughing. And finally, I told someone that I was having a problem, and I went to a neighbor the very morning. Sorry, I forgot that. The very neighbor after this thing appeared. The very morning, I went to a neighbor to ask if there was a church around that I could go to for help. And they told me where I could find a church, because it was a neighborhood that I didn't know. I was only staying there briefly. I went to the church and I rang the bell, and it was a Catholic church. Well, they did me a big favor, because the priest came out and I said, I need help. He said, are you a member here? I said, no. He said, well, we can't help you. So he slammed the door in my face and told me to go away. I left, and after I left there, before I left there, I stood there first of all, and I bawled my head off really loudly. I mean, really bawling from my belly, because I was so upset that this church, I was thinking, well, if I can't go to a church for help, where can I go to for help? So anyway, he came back out after he heard me crying, and he gave me a piece of paper with an address on it. He sent me to a Baptist church. So I caught the bus and I went to the Baptist church. This was in East London. I was in Bethnal Green at the time. And as I was sitting on the bus, I saw a church across the road. I didn't even look at the paper first. I looked and I saw a church across the road, and the door was open. So I rang the bell, and in those days it was the buses that had open backs. And I rang the bell and ran downstairs and almost jumped off the bus. I was so determined to get to somebody who could actually help me. I went into this church, and it was a Bible shop. And there was a young man serving behind the counter there. So I started telling him what happened that night. And I went, ooh, I just spat out so much information. He was just staring at me in amazement that somebody could have this experience. He said, but I can't help you. He said, but I'll get the minister to come and see you. Well, long story short, the minister did see me, the Baptist minister, and they invited me to come to their church. And I said, well, I'll come to your church, but I don't want to accept Jesus in my life. I'd had a bad experience as a child, as a Christian child, in a home of much violence. And so therefore, I didn't want to be part of any organization called Christianity that had that kind of background. The Lord knew my heart. And finally, he said to me, well, I said to him, I want to be exorcised. And he said, okay, I can exorcise you, but if I exorcise you, he read something from the Bible which was really scary, that if you get one devil out and you don't fill the house with something, 7 more devils will come in. So I got really scared, and I said, well, I still don't want to accept Jesus in my life. But I started to read the Bible. And I started to read the Bible because I bought a Bible from the Baptist. Anyway, I started going to the Baptist church after a while because they were trying to help me. And I got kicked out of where I was staying. And the Baptists put me into one of their houses. A young couple who had not long been married, about 2 or 3 weeks. And so I stayed in their house, but I couldn't sleep in the dark because of this demon that was following me around everywhere. So I'd always have the lights on full blast, and I'd sleep all night with the full light on. But one night, I was lying in bed after somebody told me that if I wanted to get rid of this demon, I should fast. So I believe very strongly in the power of fasting. So I fasted that day, and I didn't eat the night, and I went to bed, and as I was lying in bed, I knew somebody was in the room, but it wasn't an uncomfortable presence, because I knew the presence of the demon. But it wasn't an uncomfortable presence. And finally, I saw an angel standing in the wall, literally in the wall of the room. And I looked at his face, and I just had a big smile on my face when I saw this angel standing there. I didn't really know why he was there, except that I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was so beautiful. And for the next 8 hours at least, he was in my room exorcising me. And from my neck down,